thank you, particular thank you also to the organizers to give me the opportunity to present the theoretical part, so to say, the complementary part to these very nice experiments done at Catania. And the interest, I think, in these type of reactions is, or should be considered as being twofold. First of all, there's a basic nuclear structure and nuclear reaction interest in such outstanding, very exotic reactions, namely to study in detail higher order processes in nuclear physics. And I think that is of interest not only for double beta decay, but also as a general understanding of the many body dynamics of those systems. And the second one is certainly this very close relationship to the double beta decay physics, and the big advantage of those laboratory experiments is certainly that you can do them in the laboratory. You don't have to wait for a very rare event to happen or not to happen, since it's yet to be observed. We don't know about these, the lifetime of those systems. And as we have heard yesterday, particularly by Jonathan Engel's talk, there are large uncertainties on the nuclear matrix element, and also Jason Holt told us about that. Now let's go quickly through the agenda of my talk. What I'm going to discuss is, first of all, just to introduce all the concepts, a bit on heavy ion single charge exchange reactions, because that is certainly the basis, the entry point into the whole field. Then I briefly mention something about response functions included into the single charge exchange, but also in the double charge exchange calculations. And then we come to these double charge exchange reactions, and there are two distinct types of reactions. So that is this two-step double single charge exchange reaction, which is a sequential process like 2 neutrino double beta decay. And there is a one-step mechanism, which is a completely new point of view on the reaction mechanism. And since there is a large similarity, what the Majorana neutrino is doing, we call it the Majorana double single charge exchange reaction. And finally, I give you some outlook and summary. So if you are interested in all the background, the historical summary, so to say, of the field, particularly on the single charge exchange, but also on the double charge exchange, then I recommend you to have a look in our recent review article, which appeared last August or September or so quite recent. And there you find a lot of background material. And here in my talk, I can certainly only summarize and indicate directions of the evolution. So let's go to single charge exchange reactions. What is the interest in that reaction, or why does one have the idea to use strong interaction physics to probe a weak interaction phenomenon? And that is deeply related to the similarities of structures, not of dynamical content, but of structures, of diagrammatic structures of the two types of interactions. And that is illustrated here a bit. So the strong interaction vertex, if you go down to the subnucleonic level, then you can imagine that there's a virtual, say, rho meson emitted, and that carries away one of the charges of the quark and replaces the other one, and finally decays eventually in, say, 2 pions, and then you are on shell. So just by comparing these two types of diagrams, the similarity is evident, because here in that case you also have a vector meson of a different type, but it's still a vector meson, which does not decay by strong interaction, but by weak interaction in a lepton and the corresponding neutrino or antineutrino. And if you go down to a non-relativistic reduction of all these complicated processes, then this similarity becomes even more evident looking to the isovector nucleon-nucleon interaction. There is the same type of vertex recovered in this spin-independent isospin interaction, the Majorana, or the Wigner part of the interaction, and that is like the Fermi operator. In the weak sector, there's the spin-isospin interaction, that's like the Gamow-Teller vertex in the weak interaction, and then you have the tensor interactions, which is composed of a longitudinal, spin-longitudinal part from the pion and a transverse part coming from the roll meson, and if you combine them, that is, in particular this one here, has the resemblance to the weak magnetic vertex in the weak interaction, and these are typically combined in such a way that you are getting out the well-known second rank 2 tensor operator. So there's this similarity in the operator structure that is exploited in using Schwarz exchange reactions to study also weak interaction processes. Now let's spend a few words on the historical background, so to say, and also on this problem of the transfer, which Manuela was mentioning. And as you, on the left diagram, on the left plot, I am showing you results of one of the first fully microscopic analysis of heavy ion charge exchange data. Measurements were done, at GSI. So it's a real heavy system, as you see. I mean, it's calcium and calcium on calcium, and titanium on calcium at 385 beams. So that is close to the Coulomb barrier. And in this case, that, by the way, was a big collaboration between German groups and also Witwatersrand University. John Carter, who is meanwhile retired, was important there, and Peter von Neumann-Kosel, sitting over there. He was one of the important experimentalists at that time. And in this, close to the Coulomb barrier, there's a clear dominance of the transfer. So it would not be a good idea to use those energies for these weak interaction studies. Here, there's another collection of results for a lighter system, and covering here a range of energies from Coulomb barrier up to 100 MeV per nucleon. And if you look very carefully, then you can see there's transfer contributions going strongly down, and there's the direct contribution driven by this collisional nucleon-nucleon process that is coming up very rapidly at the higher energies. And there's another constraint or another important point. Sometimes, like in these data Manuela has been showing, structural and kinematical effects are suppressing, in addition, these transfer contributions. Actually, in the beginning of charge exchange reactions, those charge exchange, single and double charge exchange reactions, they were used to produce exotic nuclei only. So nobody had the idea that they can be used for nuclear structure research as we are doing it. And that is a completely new aspect also in these studies here. So now we have been, in a recent paper, 1.5 years ago, we have been reformulating the whole theory for the single charge exchange reaction, and the idea was, or the necessity which we have seen, is to disentangle in a more clear way the reaction part of the ion-ion interaction, to separate that from the nuclear structure part. And that can be done by momentum space or momentum representation techniques. And in that way, you can split off the reaction part, the ion-ion interaction, initial final state interactions, which have to be taken into account, as Manuela has shown you, because of the strong absorptive interaction of heavy ion systems. They can be cast or put together into a distortion coefficient, which in the limit approaches the elastic iron S matrix, in fact. So that is directly related to elastic scattering. And that has, in this formalism, that can be folded in with the plane wave matrix elements, the form factor, the Fourier transform of your transition, and this Fourier or this form factor here, that contains all this interesting the information which we are interested in on the nuclear structure properties of the transition. So details, I refer you to go into that paper there. The message is we have methods available theoretically by which we can formally at least separate the reaction part, the iron-iron dynamics from the nuclear structure in content of the reaction. And that is also followed up in the two-step calculations to a large extent. And so I will not repeat that again, but you should maybe remember this. So that is a recent result for the single charge exchange reaction for the same type of reaction as on the incident channel as Manuela was telling us. And you see that is a very multiple rich cross-section actually. So you are measuring a whole variety of cross-section. These reactions are not so selective on a single multipolarity. So if there's a multiple rich nuclear structure input or structure-inductor phenomenon behind, then you will see all those multipoles involved. And these calculations, they are done by using QRPA, single charge exchange spectra calculation. And you see, if you remember what Manuela was showing, there was a strong increase at higher energies of these spectral distributions. That comes from these strong continuum contributions at the high excitation energy, so you populate strongly those unbound states, in particular here in the in the target system. And these calculations, they in fact are not only QRPA, it's extended QRPA because they include corpolarization contributions and the realistic treatment of the continuum. The formalism behind is to solve the Dyson equation directly and not to diagonalize the matrices as it's done usually. So you see there's a lot of multipolarities in those systems contained, and that is simply because it's an odd system which you are populating, and that makes life complicated even if you start from an even system. So let's come to nuclear double charge exchange. There, the first thing, so the scheme which you can draw is like this. So you have initial and final states, and then you may have populations or reaction steps into intermediate states populated by by transfer contributions, and what is of particular interest, there are also the possibility by acting twice or with this Majorana mechanism acting once with the charge exchange operator or the isospin operator. And as Manuela showed you and as I tried to convince you, these transfer branches the conditions can be chosen that they are strongly suppressed. Let's come to the double single charge exchange reaction, and that is in a more schematic diagram can be considered like this. So you have one single charge exchange reaction, then the system propagates in the intermediate system, then you have the second one, and you are finally end up in the, say, in the neon 18 calcium argon 40 system. The reaction amplitude is the second order. What we are using is the second order DWBA reaction amplitude. So that is a kind of a perturbative approach in that, and that is justified because these are very low cross sections, so they are not dominating the whole reaction mechanism, so second order is good enough. And again, here we are using the separation technique, which I indicated for the single charge exchange, and then you are left with an expression which also by structure resembles very much what you are used to see in double beta-decay, two neutrino double beta-decay discussions. And these matrix elements here, these are form factors actually, so they are dependent on momentum transfer and all those things of those first and second step single charge exchange reactions, but they have to be summed over and integrated over, folded by the momentum transfer certainly. And so that is, so to say, under control, and there's just a paper ready, and it's under review with physics letters B. And here I'm showing you for our standard reaction the results, so the data compared to the calculated cross-section. That is also a multipole rich calculation. So in both systems, in all the systems, we have included multipolarities up to 5 plus minus, and spin and tensor interaction, all those complications are fully accounted for. You see the cross-section, I should emphasize, there's no scaling factor. That is an absolute calculation. So we do not need to include unhappiness factor or fudge factors or whatever you call it. We are really reaching the data. And, but still, this type of calculation is producing apparently too much oscillatory structures, and there's some room left for some other mechanism. And we cannot fill up, so to say, those minima here just by playing around with parameters. They are stable. So we have to look for something else. And okay, so the relation, well, I skipped this by reasons of time. And the next, or what could be the alternative to this sequential second order process? That's what one might call the direct double charge exchange mechanism, or what we are calling the Majorana double charge exchange mechanism. And that wording may become clear if you consider these two types of diagrams here. So that is what we have seen many times during the last days, namely this Majorana diagram for the double beta-decay. So there's a hadronic analog. Again, we can emit here a virtual, say a virtual row meson, and that virtual row meson decays in a pair, quark-anti-quark pair of virtual nature connecting the two vertices, and emits another quark-anti-quark pair into the space, and then we are ending up with the same final configuration as in the zero neutrino double beta-decay. This one here can happen in free space. We are waiting for this event since, I don't know, 15 years or 30 years maybe, and maybe we wait another 10 to the 27 years before we see something. This one here cannot occur in the laboratory. You need to have some acceptor because that is a far off shell process. You are producing two mesons, so that is at least 260 or 70 MeV of energy between the initial and the final state if you would do it on shell. But if you have a second nucleus which accepts these two particles, then you can do it off shell. And that is the idea behind this Majorana double charge exchange reactions, namely to take this one, consider this one as a virtual pi plus pi minus reaction. And the diagram which I have shown you, if we boil it down to the hadronic level, so leave the QCD aspects aside, if you boil it down to the hadronic level, then it looks like this. There's a pi plus coming in, then it's exciting, doing something on the one nucleon that emits a neutral pion, and doing something on the other nucleon, and that is then emitting a pi minus. So if you do it, so that's the whole diagram then in full glory. The second nucleus takes care of the virtuality of that intermediate process. And if you now blind out the left-hand side, then you see it looks like a pi minus, pi plus reaction suddenly. And that is, in principle, understood, namely by experiments doing these, considering explicitly those reactions. The interesting point is that we also know how those rescattering the pi nucleon T-matrix behaves in energy. There's this delta resonance, and that means this Majorana double charge exchange reaction that is resonantly enhanced. If you vary incident energy, you will scan to some extent through that resonance structure, while the two-step process remains constant or even decreases with energy. And so that is the idea behind changing energies and the necessity to do so. Maybe I spent a few words on these reactions. So any of those vertices behind, hidden in these T-matrices here, so the left-hand side, the right-hand side, that is of this structure, and that is what at LAMP and so at Los Alamos was done explicitly, namely considering a pi plus, pi minus reaction, and that the major branch in this energy range which we are interested in is that the pi minus excites the delta resonance that decays in the proton and the pi zero. That pi zero interacts with a second neutron, makes the delta zero resonance, and that decays in the pi plus proton channel. And so that you see, if you now reduce, so to say, this diagram to the essentials, then you see there are two charge currents and there are two neutral currents are involved, and that's what Jonathan Engel was telling us yesterday. It's of interest and importance to understand in double beta decay as well. And so if you want to learn more about these historically, the pi plus, pi minus reactions, I recommend you to have a look in our review article that's covered there. So there are other diagrams. So there's not only this pi minus, pi plus, there's also pi plus, pi minus diagram. They are crossed. These are called box diagrams. They are well known from, say, the physics of light scattering, or the physics of gauge boson scattering in general, but here we have them in a different context. Then we have also these crossed box diagrams which describe processes which are not manageable in free space, because that is a pi minus and the pi plus reaction. And so there is a new aspect in these reactions as well. It's not only mapping the known pi plus, pi minus type reactions to a virtual environment. So this reaction amplitude has a bit more complicated structure than you are used to see, and you can group it such that you have an effective intranuclear interaction in each of these nuclei. 1 minute. And that is then connected by those charge currents between the nuclei. And so in principle, we know how to do that, but the technical problem is that you have to do 12-dimensional integrations, 4 times 3 integrations at least, maybe also a spectral function, so it would be another 4 integrations in addition. So it's a bit affording from a technical point of view. So let me show you at the end results. So this is now a first result, not covering all those diagrams which I've shown you. It's only this pi plus, pi minus set of diagrams. And this, as you see, is of a much smoother nature, less diffractive structure than the other one. And the reason is that there's a coherent contribution of, so it's a 0 plus 0 plus transition. But that can be achieved by having total L equals 0, S equals 0, and also L equal 2 and S equal 2. And that S equal 2 part, that is an effective interaction constructed, an effective isotensor interaction constructed from these pion-pion interactions. And that makes it interferent contribution. Here I've plotted the single contributions separately, and you see that nicely fills up the minima. And here I'll compare you finally our Majorana double charge exchange single step result with these previously shown two-step results, and you see both are contained in the data. And as I said before, as a perspective, if you go to higher energies, then we expect that the red curve, so to say, remains as it is, and the green curve, the double single charge exchange, goes slightly down, and we will have a more clear picture, clear recording on these mechanisms. So, without going through the list of topics which I have discussed, I only want to emphasize that within the last 3 years we have built up, I think, a quite active theory group in parallel to the experimental activities in Catania. And particularly I want to point out the students, so Jessica Bellone did her thesis on the double single charge exchange. Danilo Gambacota is just a new member of the group, concentrating with a good nuclear structure background and helping to push that forward. And there, Maria Colonna is also certainly very important. So, okay, thank you very much for your attention.